Thank you. Well, it's a real pleasure to be here today. It's always great to be with people who are passionate about farming and food issues, and it's a particular treat to follow the congressman. I'm a big fan of his for several reasons, but one of the reasons is because he has actually been to my farm in Maine, and I don't think anyone else in this room can say that. He attended an event that I held for a friend of mine who was running for Congress, and she didn't win, but there's a silver lining to the story because she found herself in Washington as the number 2 person at Emily's List, the organization that does such great work getting progressive women elected. I've somehow found my way to Washington as well, and unlike my friend, it wasn't really in my plans. I have a passion for policy, but my focus has always been at the state and the local level, because that's where I really feel you can get the most done. My only in-depth exposure to federal policy was when I was on the board of the National Campaign for Sustainable Agriculture and worked briefly on the 1995 Farm Bill. It seems like a long time. And at that time, I said to myself, I am never going to do that again. And now, however, I find myself at the helm of an organization that has been actively involved in federal policy and all of the farm bills for the last 40 years. In fact, American Farmland Trust can take credit for the conservation title in the Farm Bill, which came into law first in 1985, and has since that time done a lot, not as much as it needs to do, but done a lot to advance farmland protection and conservation practices across the land. But I am not going to talk about the Farm Bill today. The title of this session is The Future of Agricultural Policy, and the 2018 Farm Bill is a lot of things, but I doubt if it's going to be particularly forward-looking. Don't get the wrong idea. The Farm Bill is terribly important. You heard that from an impassioned congressman a couple of moments ago. There are both gains that we need to hold on to, and there are important things that we need to push for. And I applaud Congressman Blumenauer for his efforts on trying to push these issues. They're important steps, but there's so much more that needs to happen. Quite simply, we need a revolution in our agricultural policy. Why? Absolutely, we do. And the reason should be really clear, because quite simply, we don't have any chance of a sustainable future without sustainable agriculture. It's that fundamental. And yet, agriculture is not on a sustainable path. Here are just 3 areas that are falling far short. Let me start with the land. America is losing farmland at the rate of 1.5 million acres a year. That's the equivalent of all the farmland in Iowa in a 20-year period. Number 2, how we farm. Not nearly enough farmers or ranchers are following the best conservation practices, which are needed to build soil health, sequester carbon, control runoff, reduce pollution, and so many other things that we simply can't live without. And number 3, the next generation. The ownership of over 1/3 of all the farmland in this country, 1/3, will change hands in the next 10 to 20 years due simply to the age of the farmland owner. Here in Washington State, 800,000 acres of farmland will be in transition. These are huge challenges. And many people are addressing them very effectively, although not at a level that's needed, very effectively at the local and state level. That's where the best work is often happening. And yet, as I know from my own work in Maine, when you're working in the trenches, it's often hard to see how that local work connects back to something broader. So let me offer 3 themes to help all of us make those connections. Theme number 1, farmland as essential infrastructure. While most Americans view infrastructure as roads and bridges and schools and broadband, there is a deeper and more basic infrastructure on which all of us rely: our farmland. The definition of infrastructure: fundamental facilities and systems serving society. It fits agriculture perfectly. What's more fundamental than the land that grows the food we eat? Except there is a big difference. As much as it hurts to see roads or schools go into disrepair, they can be rebuilt. With farmland, once it is lost, it is gone. Now, what would it mean for public policy if more people embrace this mindset of farmland as infrastructure? Well, there's a generally accepted opinion out there now that we can no longer afford to take infrastructure for granted, which is, of course, exactly what we have done and sadly are doing with our farmland. But if thinking of farmland as infrastructure makes us think of it as something essential, then we begin to view a whole series of development issues and land use issues through a completely different lens. And that's really powerful. Theme number 2, smart conservation practices can combat climate change. So there's plenty of promise in what farming done right can do to help restore the planet. Few people realize it, but a lot of the carbon that's in our atmosphere has not come from burning fossil fuels, but has been released from the soil through less than ideal farming practices. But innovative conservation practices, and there's a range of them. It could be no-till or low-till, or better use of crop rotations, or silvopasture, or alley cropping. We can go on and on. But the point is, these kind of farming practices can take that carbon out of the atmosphere and put it back into the soil. What does this theme, what does this vision suggest for agricultural policy? Well, for one thing, it suggests that the conservation title in the Farm Bill is only a drop in the bucket of what's needed. But it also suggests that we need to think about the purpose of farming differently. So that it's not viewed as just about growing food, but also about intentionally and actively removing carbon from our atmosphere. We have to think about farming differently. It has multiple purposes. We all know that, but we sometimes lose track of it. Even my organization loses track of it. American Farmland Trust is primarily known in some circles by our iconic bumper sticker, "No farms, no food." But you know, maybe it should be "No farms, no food, no future." Because we need farms not just to grow food, we need it to combat climate change. Theme number 3, a nation of farmers. Now, I'm not suggesting we go back to our agrarian roots where most Americans were farmers. But at this point in time, it's less than 1% of our population and falling. And we can get that number up. There is no shortage of people who want to farm. Young people, veterans coming out of the service, people interested in second careers. There is no shortage of that, but there is a shortage of affordable land, and there is a shortage of opportunities for would-be farmers to get support in the services they need. What policy changes would help recreate a nation of farmers? How about comprehensive health care, enabling people to risk leaving another job? How about forgiveness of student debt for people who are becoming farmers? And of course, considerable more funding for farmland protection that's going to be used to make land more affordable for the next generation. Absolutely, critically important. I could go on and on with this list, but my purpose here is to not brainstorm specific policy changes, but rather to point out the value of starting with the big picture, the future we want. And from that, the policy specifics will flow. Now, maybe it's no surprise that the three themes that I've harped on today happen to coincide with American Farmland Trust's three-pronged mission. It's about the land, it's about farming practices, and it's about the farmers on that land, the stewards of that land. I'm proud of the fact that we're the only national organization that takes that kind of comprehensive, holistic view. Fortunately, a lot of folks at the local level see those connections. But sadly, on the national level, that's not the usual conversation about agriculture. At American Farmland Trust, we take great pride in having really created the conservation agriculture movement. We helped create 29 state farmland protection programs. We've helped create dozens of agricultural land trusts across the country. That has helped protect 6 million acres of farmland. And we've helped advance smarter farming practices on millions of acres more. And in doing all this, we have supported literally tens of thousands of farmers. And boy, that sounds really great, doesn't it? And yet, it is far from what we need. I'll just give you one quick example. All right, I see. We've protected 6 million acres of farmland in 40 years. We lose that much every 4. In closing, let me say this. If we want comprehensive and forward-looking agricultural policy, we need to address agricultural issues holistically. It's about the land, the practices, and the people. However, it begins with the land. Many people are ardently for or against something in agriculture. I get that. I have strong opinions as well. But we can't afford to fight over this stuff. Because as we do, we are losing our land. And different people may have different views of what we should do with farming. But if we lose the land, we'll never have the opportunity. And the final piece of advice is get a bumper sticker. And I have many with me.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.